Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I was already 3 bites into a plate of lamb that probably cost more than my monthly groceries when it hit me. I didn't belong here. Not really, not in the way they did. My name's Lisa. I'm 33. I live in Oakland, California, and I'm a project manager at a tech startup. Decent pay, solid benefits, good team. But to my family, I might as well be scraping gum off sidewalks. This dinner was supposed to be a celebration. My dad, Charles, had just closed some massive business deal and decided to throw a formal dinner at their place in Lafayette. The house looked like a damn hotel lobby. Glass chandeliers, flower arrangements flown in from somewhere ridiculous, and table settings like a wedding reception. They even hired servers in black ties to pass hors d'oeuvres like foie gras on crostini. I sat near the end of the 12-foot table, wedged between my sister, Sarah, and her husband, Todd, who kept checking his Rolex like he had somewhere better to be. Across from us, my two brothers, Greg and Mark, were laughing it up over some golf trip they'd just taken to Pebble Beach. "Let's raise a glass," my dad said, standing with a practiced smile. "To the future, global expansion, new markets, and the continued legacy of excellence we've built together." Everyone clapped. Greg stood up and clinked his glass. "To Dad, the real shark in the water." "You've still got it, Charles," Mark added, lifting his wine. I raised my glass too, but no one noticed. When the toast ended, Sarah turned to me and said, "So, how's the coding or whatever you do going?" I smiled, tight-lipped. "It's project management, not coding. We're leading a platform integration for a new biotech client." "Oh," she said, tilting her head like I'd said something in a foreign language. "Sounds interesting." I tried to elaborate, but Greg cut in. "You still doing that little startup thing?" He smirked. "Did they give you a coffee mug with your name on it yet?" "Actually," I said, forcing a calm tone, "I have equity. We just closed a Series B round for $30 million. 30? Greg laughed. "Dad spends that on quarterly bonuses." Their laughter stung more than I wanted to admit. Mom chimed in from the other end of the table. "Lisa's doing just fine. Her job sounds fun, doesn't it?" "Sure," Greg said. "Real fun." I took a sip of water and looked around at the table, linen napkins folded like swans, wine glasses refilled without asking, everyone basking in my father's glow. This was their world, always had been. They made it clear. I was just visiting. Charles tapped his wine glass again. "So here's the plan," he said, standing with that smug confidence he wore like a tailored suit. "The deal we closed this week opens doors in Singapore and Dubai. We're about to go international. Real scale, real money." A couple claps popped up around the table. Greg gave a low whistle. "Damn, Dad, that's big." Charles grinned. "It'll take serious capital, more than usual. But we've got a few key backers lined up. I'll be pulling from reserves, moving some assets, leveraging the California properties." My fork hovered in the air. I waited, just a second longer, hoping someone might ask what I thought. Nobody did. He kept talking about numbers like they were monopoly money. Tens of millions, strategic buyouts, leverage, liquidity, blah, blah, blah. All while sipping red wine like he was narrating a documentary about his own genius. I cleared my throat. "I could help," I said, quiet but not timid. The room paused. "What's that, sweetheart?" my mom asked, reaching for the bread basket like we weren't having a conversation. I said I could help. "I've got savings. I could invest. 200,000. Greg let out a choked laugh mid-sip. 200,000? Are you serious? I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on my dad. "Lisa," Sarah said, giving me that fake smile people use on little kids, "that's very generous." "It's not a donation," I said. "I'd want terms, equity, involvement. I believe in expansion, and I believe in ROI. Greg leaned back, already grinning. "This isn't Shark Tank, Lisa. 200K isn't going to cover the valet bill in Singapore." "Jesus, Greg," I snapped. "It's a business conversation." "To you, maybe," he shot back, still laughing. "To the rest of us, it's an actual business." I looked to my mom. She pressed her cloth napkin into her lap and said, "It's a lovely gesture, honey, really. But this is a different scale. Charles is dealing with investors who move millions like you move coffee money." I move more than coffee money," I said through my teeth. Charles gave a long, fake sigh. "I appreciate the offer," he said, not even looking at me. "That's thoughtful. But we've got the capital we need, The strategy's already in motion. No room at the table. That's what he was saying. Greg shook his head. I still can't believe you thought 200 grand would move the needle. Better than sitting around riding Dad's coattails, I snapped. Greg's grin dropped for half a second. He didn't like that. I built my own career, he said. I'm not asking to throw pennies into someone else's pool. Charles raised a hand like a schoolteacher. Let's not fight. This is supposed to be a celebration. Exactly, Carol said. Lisa, your success is lovely, but this isn't the time for side pitches. I shut my mouth, not because I agreed, because I knew damn well what was happening. Dismissed. Again. Like I was a kid trying to sit at the grown-ups table with monopoly money and ambition. I stared down at my wine. The silence around me wasn't quiet. It was smug. Every eye was somewhere else. Every smirk felt like a brick on my chest. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, but I wouldn't let it show. They went back to talking about Dubai like I'd never opened my mouth. I folded my napkin and stood up. I have an early meeting tomorrow, I said. Thanks for dinner. I didn't wait for anyone to say goodbye. I walked out without looking back. My heels clicked across the marble like a metronome, steady and loud in the silence behind me. I made it to my car, slammed the door shut, and just sat there for a second, breathing. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that when I was younger, when it still hurt in the way you think maybe it's your fault. This was different. I wasn't sad. I was done. The drive back to Oakland took 40 minutes, and I don't remember most of it. I parked in my usual spot outside my building. Old brick, cracked stucco, no valet in sight. My apartment smelled like lavender and takeout containers. I dropped my keys on the counter and kicked off my shoes. The silence felt cleaner than the air at that dinner table. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. They saw me as a charity case in a nice blouse. A girl with a toy job and monopoly money. Screw that. I sat down at my desk, powered up my laptop, and opened my finance tracker. Then I picked up my phone and called Andrew. He answered on the second ring. Lisa, it's late. Everything okay? I need a full breakdown of my portfolio, I said. Total liquid, total in equity, everything. There was a pause. You planning a move? I'm going to invest, I said, but not in them. Andrew let out a low breath. Lisa, you've spent years building this portfolio. You pull the wrong thing too fast, you could take a real hit, and you'd have to explain why you're moving capital in this economy. I'm not asking for permission, I said. I need numbers, then I need options. He didn't argue. That's why I trusted him. Give me an hour, he said. I'll send over the breakdown. I hung up and pulled out a notepad, started sketching out names, property holding companies, shell corporations, joint ventures I knew were tied to my dad's business. I didn't need to take over everything, just a few critical arteries, the ones that fed the real money. By the time Andrew's report came through, I already had a rough plan. I'd start with a position in one of the joint ventures in Arizona, one Dad always used to shift capital quietly. From there, I'd reroute into the shell company that held most of their West Coast commercial property. If I could buy in through the right firms, quietly, through secondary brokers, I could build a stake before anyone noticed. I called Andrew back. We're going to start liquidating some long-term assets, I said. Not all, just enough to shift $250,000 up front. That's a big jump from the dinner number, he said. I'm not asking for a seat at the table anymore. I'm buying the goddamn table. He laughed under his breath. You sure you want to play this game? No, I said, but I'm already in it. He paused. Then I'll get it moving. I'll set up a private channel through my broker contacts. We'll do this as clean and quiet as we can. Thank you. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. I hadn't felt that kind of purpose in years. They wanted to treat me like a joke. Fine. Let's see how funny it is when I hold the keys to the empire they think I'm too small to touch. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to win. And no one was going to see it coming. The next morning, I barely slept. I kept checking my email like a maniac, watching numbers shift, signatures land, wires clear. My screen glowed with confirmations, trailing zeros and account codes. Each one felt like a brick being slid into place. I wasn't just moving money. I was building a wall between their world and mine, and this time I'd be the one with the lock on the gate. By the end of the week, everything was in motion. Saturday morning, I made coffee, sat on my secondhand couch, and flipped on the flat screen. Channel 5 was already broadcasting the press conference. There he was, Charles Andrews in his best Navy suit, front and center, cameras flashing, local anchors smiling like he invented business itself. Today marks a new chapter, my father said into the mic. We've secured a major international contract in Singapore, and we're finalizing acquisitions that will put us on the map globally. Applause, of course. Behind him stood Greg and Mark, proud little shadows in tailored suits. Sarah was in the crowd next to my mom, smiling like they were watching a graduation. None of them had a clue. My phone buzzed. It was Andrew, confirmed. Full controlling stake in Mesa Properties and Beacon Commercial Holdings. Both fully cleared. You now own 51% combined. I read it twice. Then again, that was it. Two of the biggest assets in Charles's portfolio, commercial real estate monsters, warehouses, leases, entire business parks. I now controlled the companies that controlled the land his empire ran on. He kept talking on TV about expansion, listing properties that, funny enough, were now mine. I took a slow sip of coffee and let it settle. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. This was exactly how it was supposed to feel. Calm, in control. Another buzz. Andrew again. We can proceed with a third target next week if you're ready. Let me know. I typed back. Hold, let them enjoy this press cycle. We'll move Monday. The camera cut to a reporter asking questions. Mr. Andrews, any concerns about spreading too fast too soon? My dad chuckled like he'd heard it all before. We've done the groundwork. Everything's accounted for. Sure, I thought. Except who actually owns your groundwork now? After the broadcast, the family group chat blew up with texts. Greg, the GOAT strikes again. Sarah, Dad's incredible. Global in his 60s. Unreal. Carol, couldn't be prouder. No one mentioned me, not that I expected them to. I set my phone down. No response, no jabs, just silence. Let them toast his empire. Let them raise glasses and slap backs. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a one-bedroom apartment with a loose radiator and peeling paint, and more power over his company than any of them combined. I opened my laptop again and scrolled through the newly updated corporate records. There it was in black and white. Mesa Properties, LLC, majority shareholder. L. Andrews, Beacon Holdings, majority shareholder. L. Andrews, not the little one. Not fun tech job, not nice gesture. I leaned back in my chair, watching the last few minutes of the broadcast. My father waved at the crowd. Mark handed him a pen. He signed some symbolic paper like he was signing history. He had no idea what was already missing from under his feet, and I wasn't done. Not even close. The first crack came exactly 1 week later. I was at my desk, half watching a webinar when my phone lit up with Mom's name. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. Lisa, she said, her voice tight, can you come over for dinner tonight? Your father's dealing with some things. What kind of things? She hesitated. Just come. When I showed up, the energy in that house was completely different. No fancy music, no laughter echoing through the dining room. The lights were too bright, the air thick like no one had opened a window in days. Charles sat at the head of the table, phone in hand, scrolling through something with his jaw locked. Greg and Mark were already there, both looking like someone had died. What's going on? I asked, setting my purse down. Greg looked at me, then at Dad. You tell her. Charles didn't look up. Investors are pulling out, he said flatly. 2 major ones, both claiming we overextended last quarter. They said they're reallocating funds to safer projects. Mark added, it's about 40 million in commitments. Gone. I pulled out a chair and sat. 40 million. Not fatal, Charles said, finally looking up. But messy. We were supposed to finalize new contracts this month. Now the press might get wind that our backing isn't as solid as it looks. Mom placed a glass of water in front of him. You'll fix it. You always do. He nodded, but the edge was gone from his confidence. His hands fidgeted against the table, a small, nervous habit I'd never seen before. Greg spoke up. We could move capital from the Arizona properties. That'd buy time. Can't, Charles muttered. That liquidity's locked under new management. I nearly smiled but didn't. New management. He nodded, rubbing his temples. Mesa Properties shifted ownership last week. Some restructuring I didn't catch in time. We're looking into who took control. That's unfortunate, I said, keeping my tone neutral. He shot me a look. Unfortunate. It's sabotage. Someone's buying up our infrastructure from the inside out. Maybe it's one of your competitors, Greg said. Could be Beacon Capital or those Texas investors. No, Charles said sharply. This feels targeted. I took a sip of my water, pretending to think. So what's the plan? We renegotiate, he said. We find new capital. We hold the line until we can move assets. Mom chimed in, forcing a smile. We'll just tighten things for now. No panic. But there was panic, silent, pulsing through the room like static. Mark drummed his fingers against the table. Greg checked his phone every 30 seconds. My father's phone buzzed nonstop, and each call left his face a little grayer. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to check a work email and stepped outside onto their back patio. The air smelled like damp grass and stress. I pulled out my phone and called Andrew. Everything's clean, he said before I could even ask. Funds are fully transferred. You now control the majority stake in Beacon and Mesa. We've got verification on record. Good, I said quietly. What about withdrawals from their liquid accounts? Some have already hit, he replied. It'll show up as investor uncertainty. Looks like their risk profile tripped a few alarms. I smiled faintly. Perfect. Lisa, he said carefully, you're aware this is going to cause real damage, right? This isn't symbolic. I know exactly what it is. When I went back inside, they were all still huddled around Charles's laptop, talking over each other. This can't all be coincidence, Greg said. Mesa, Beacon, and 2 investors pulling out in the same week. Don't start conspiracy theories, Mom snapped. Your father needs calm, not chaos. Calm, Mark barked. We're bleeding money. Charles slammed his hand on the table. Enough. We fix this quietly. Nobody talks to the press. Nobody makes calls outside this room. Everyone went silent. I slipped back into my seat, cutting a small piece of chicken I didn't plan to eat. He looked at me again, eyes heavy. You've been quiet tonight. I'm just listening, I said. Seems like everyone else has it handled. He gave a bitter laugh. Handled? Sure. The meal ended with no toast, no dessert, no laughter. Just the sound of utensils clinking, and my father's phone vibrating again and again. On the drive home, I could still hear his voice echoing in my head, sharp and desperate. This feels targeted. He was right. It was. By Wednesday morning, the dam finally cracked. I was back at work, half listening to a project call, when my personal phone buzzed 6 times in a row. Greg, Mark, my mother, all within 3 minutes. I let it ring. I already knew what it was about. Then came the headline across my screen, Andrew's capital stock down. 13% investor confidence drops as withdrawals spike. I leaned back in my chair, muting the Zoom. The company wasn't bleeding anymore. It was hemorrhaging. By the time I got to my parents' house that evening, it was chaos. Greg was pacing the living room, on speakerphone with someone at Citigroup. Mark had a laptop open, running numbers out loud. My mom sat stiff on the edge of the couch, rubbing her temples with both hands. And my father, he looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him, and he hadn't caught his breath since Monday. We've got less than 3 weeks to close, Greg said, voice sharp. If we don't cover that shortfall, the Singapore deal falls apart. I've already called 4 secondary lenders, Mark snapped. They won't touch us. Word's out. Someone's pulling strings behind the curtain and no one wants to be left holding the bag. Charles stood in the corner, phone to his ear. I need everything you have on the Mesa and Beacon buyouts, he said quietly. Name, history, broker details. I want legal on this now. There's something off here. He hung up, jaw clenched, and looked around the room like it might give him an answer. This wasn't some market fluke. Somebody made this happen, and I want to know who. I sat down in the chair across from him and crossed my legs, calm as a surgeon. Any leads? Not yet, he said. But we're tracing the transfers. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They moved fast and used the right firms to stay hidden. I gave a slow nod. Sounds sophisticated. His eyes locked on mine for half a second, searching. But he moved on. Greg slammed his laptop shut. Every investor I've called wants out. They're asking too many questions. Why did ownership shift? Why is the stock tanking? Why is no one answering with real answers? Mark stood up. We need to pause everything. Freeze payroll, cancel travel, halt expansion until we figure this out. No, Charles barked. Freezing operations will look like guilt. We hold the line, we fight back. That's what we do. That's what we used to do, Greg muttered. Nobody heard me slide my phone out under the table. Andrew had sent a single line text. You now hold 63% between Mesa, Beacon, and newly acquired minor assets. Charles is down to 28%. That was it. Checkmate. I typed back, hold any new moves? Let it breathe. They're still spinning. I looked up. Mom had started crying quietly. She wiped her eyes with a cocktail napkin, the kind they always kept in the drawer for guests. This was supposed to be Charles's legacy, she whispered. 30 years of building. And now it's unraveling in a week. I stayed quiet. It wasn't time to speak yet. Charles pulled out a folder from the side table and dropped it on the coffee table. This is everything I've got left that's liquid. If we can move it fast, we might be able to cover payroll and slow the bleeding. Greg shook his head. That'll last a month, maybe. Mark added, we need a white knight investor. Someone big, someone who doesn't care about the stink around us right now. Everyone went silent. I sat still, barely breathing, watching the desperation set in like cement. Their panic was loud, messy, and useless. They were looking everywhere but the one place that mattered, right across the table. And I wasn't about to help them, not yet. Charles didn't say a word for a full minute. He just stared at the folder on the coffee table like it might suddenly explain itself. The only sound was the faint tick of the wall clock and the rustle of Mom's napkin as she twisted it in her hands. Then he looked at me. Lisa, he said, voice low and careful. You've been quiet through all of this. Too quiet. I didn't blink. I listened better that way. He stood, slow but heavy, like he was carrying the whole damn company on his shoulders. I've had my legal team trace the last 2 property acquisitions, Mesa, Beacon. Both lead back to a single entity, L.A. Holdings. He leaned forward. That wouldn't happen to stand for Lisa Andrews, would it? The room froze. Greg's head snapped toward me. What? Mark's voice cracked. Wait, what the hell did he just say? I set my phone down on the table, folded my hands over it, and met my father's stare. You wanted to know who's been buying your assets, I said. Now you know, Mom gasped. Lisa, that's ridiculous. Tell him he's mistaken. I'm not mistaken, Charles said. His face was pale now, but his tone was sharp enough to cut glass. You've been playing in my books, moving through my subsidiaries, using private brokers under false entities. Do you have any idea what you've done? I do, I said evenly. I've done what you never thought I could. I invested in your business, quietly, consistently, for years. Greg barked out a short laugh that sounded more like disbelief. You're behind all this. Yeah, I said. Me. He looked at Mark, shaking his head. This is insane. You couldn't afford... I've been saving and investing since I was 23, I cut in. Equity payouts, stock options, crypto during the early years, startup bonuses. I've been buying stakes in your side companies since the first time you all laughed at me for offering to help. Mom stood up, still clutching that napkin. Honey, this isn't funny. You've hurt your father's company. No, I said. I own it. Her hand dropped to her side. Silence swallowed the room. Charles stepped closer. His eyes were dark, steady. You're telling me you orchestrated this entire collapse. It's not a collapse, I said. It's a transfer of control. Greg slammed his hand on the table. Jesus Christ, Lisa. Do you have any idea what this does to us? Yeah, I said calmly. It changes who's in charge. Mark's voice was thin now. This is nuts. You can't just buy up everything behind our backs and act like you're saving us. I didn't do it to save you, I said. I did it because I got tired of waiting for permission to be taken seriously. My father stared at me, silent for a long time. Then, softer, almost human, he said, Why didn't you come to me? I did, I said. That dinner. Remember? When I offered $200,000, you laughed. You all did. You told me it was a nice gesture. So I stopped asking to sit at your table and decided to build my own. Mom's lip trembled. You could have talked to us. You don't talk to me, I said. You talk at me. Big difference. Greg started pacing. You screwed us all for some ego trip. You think this makes you powerful? No, I said. It makes me capable. Something none of you ever thought I was. Charles sank back into his chair, staring down at his hands. The silence was different now, heavier, slower. Finally, he said, "So what's your endgame? You want to rub my face in it? Take over everything." I shook my head. "No. I just wanted to prove that the black sheep you all brushed off wasn't some lost cause. I built my career the hard way. No shortcuts, no family money. Every dollar I put into this came from my own grind." Mom whispered, "But you're destroying what your father built." I met her eyes. "He built a fortress. I just found the key." Greg muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care enough to ask what. Charles leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You've changed, Lisa." "No," I said. "I just stopped waiting for your approval to exist." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but the words never came. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Nothing. So I stood, smoothed my jacket, and picked up my phone. "You all wanted to know who's been pulling strings?" I said. "Now you do." And I walked out, leaving them with nothing but questions they didn't deserve the answers to. The next morning, I got the email I'd been waiting for. From Andrew. "All terms ready. Capital reserves untouched. Company can be stabilized within 48 hours pending your approval. Want to proceed." I stared at the screen for a long second. Then I typed back, "Not yet. They know who I am. Now they need to know what I want." 2 hours later, I was back in the same living room. Only this time, I wasn't sitting like a guest. I was standing, folder in hand, calm, measured. Charles looked 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. Greg and Mark were slouched in opposite corners of the couch like sulking teenagers. Mom sat in her usual chair, quiet, probably hoping this would all disappear if she blinked enough. I dropped the folder on the table. "What's this?" Charles asked, already knowing. "Terms," I said. "My terms." Mark scoffed. "You've got to be kidding me." "No," I said. "I'm not. You need liquidity. I have it. You need control back. Fine. But only if I'm in the room from now on." Greg crossed his arms. "So what? You just waltz in here and demand a seat at the boardroom table." "I own over 60% of your critical assets," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I don't have to ask for a seat. I am the table now." Silence. Charles picked up the folder and flipped through the pages. "You want a board seat, full voting rights, plus unrestricted access to operations and growth strategy." "Correct," I said. "And my name in the leadership structure. Not buried, not ceremonial, active." Greg stood up. "This is a hostile takeover." "No," I said. "This is an invitation. I could bury you. I could let it all burn and come in afterward to pick the bones clean. But I'm offering a better option. Recovery, with me at the helm." Mark pointed at me. "You're doing this out of spite." "I'm doing this because I earned it," I snapped. "While you were all congratulating yourselves at cocktail parties, I was working, saving, investing, growing quietly, smartly. And when I offered to help, you laughed in my face." Charles said nothing. "I want it in writing," I continued. "Board seat, active role, and public acknowledgement of my investment and leadership. From all of you." "That's not how we do things," Greg muttered. "It is now," I said. Charles ran a hand down his face. "And if we say no, then I pull out," I said flatly. "And watch the rest of your investors follow. You lose everything." Mom's voice cracked. "Lisa, don't do this." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm offering to save you. But I won't do it from the kiddie table anymore." Greg looked at our father. "Dad, come on. She can't just—" "She can," Charles said, cutting him off. His voice was tired, resigned. "She already did." He looked at me. "You've been planning this?" "For years." He nodded slowly, then picked up the pen. "Wait," Mark said. "You're seriously giving in?" "I'm not giving in," Charles muttered. "I'm making a business decision, something we should have done a long time ago." He signed. Greg leaned back, arms still crossed, but his face said everything. He knew they were out of moves. Mark looked like he wanted to say something else, but nothing came. I turned to them. "I'm not here for your approval anymore, but I'll take your respect, or I'll walk and let you drown." Charles stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the board." I didn't take it right away. I looked around the room at all of them. "Say it." Greg blinked. "Say what?" "That I'm not just Lisa from the startup. That I'm not a gesture. That I belong at this table." Charles nodded. "You earned this? More than we gave you credit for." Mark muttered, "You're a shark. Just like him." "Wrong," I said. "I'm smarter than him." Then I shook my father's hand. Not out of sentiment, out of power. The official confirmation came by email 2 days later. Board appointment, Lisa Andrews, voting member, effective immediately. I read it once, then again, then closed the laptop. No celebration, no champagne, just facts. The following Monday, I walked into the boardroom in the San Francisco office. Same skyline, same leather chairs, same smug portraits of my father on the wall, but the energy had shifted. When I stepped in, they didn't ignore me this time. They looked up. They stood. Greg gave me a tight nod. Mark couldn't hold eye contact for more than 2 seconds. Carol hugged me in the hallway like we were best friends now, whispering, "We're proud of you," like it was a magic phrase that made up for the last 10 years. Charles didn't say much. He just pulled out my chair and gestured for me to sit. The company was stabilizing fast. Andrew had already wired the capital, and the investors were calming down. The Singapore deal was back on track. Internally, people were talking. Whispers about me, about the takeover, about what I pulled off without a single public word. Some called it smart, some called it cold. I didn't care either way. At lunch, I caught Greg watching me from across the table. He gave a small shrug, like he still couldn't believe it. "I guess we underestimated you," he said. "No," I said. "You ignored me. Big difference." He didn't argue, just nodded and looked away. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I had what I wanted, the power, the seat, the say, and not because I was their daughter, because I earned it. They were adjusting. Slowly, Sarah sent a text congratulating me, 3 days late, but fine. Carol kept trying to pull me into family chats like nothing had happened. Charles started forwarding me reports at midnight, like he was testing how serious I was. I responded to everyone, on time, with solutions. That morning, I stood by the boardroom window, watching the fog roll in. My calendar buzzed. 15 minutes until the quarterly strategy meeting. This time, my name was on the agenda. First item. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel grateful. I felt ready. Their future sat in my hands now, and I was done asking for anything.